Micheal Mullins, 44 years old, convicted of killing two of the state's worst sex offenders, but not in prison. He found these two chomos on the registry after watching a brutal crime where a man molested and killed his daughter and son. He said he snapped. He's never been in trouble before. Fuck this, he said. I'm tired of it. As a man who went through sexual abuse his entire life since he was 5, it put him in an endless cycle of drugs and depression. He was tired of it. Something had to give. He would go and get the same gear to impersonate a FBI agent, a camcorder, and a .357 Magnum. As he scrolled online, he found 2 level 3 sex offenders, both hurting kids under the age of 6. Couldn't believe both of them did a combined amount of time of 8 years. So Agent Chomo Hunter goes to the door with a camcorder and a .357 Magnum. Let's get into it. In August 2005, Michael Anthony Mullen wasn't just a man with a grudge. He was a man on a mission. The headlines about child predators walking free had enraged him. With a cheap suit, a fake FBI badge, and a list of registered sex offenders, he set out to do what he thought no one else would. 2 he finds, Alessis. He was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison in 1997 for raping a 13-year-old boy. The other that would get assassinated was Vasquez. He was convicted in 1991 of molesting several relatives who suffered regular abuse, sexual and otherwise, according to court documents. He was released from prison about 2 years prior to getting whacked and remained under Department of Corrections supervision. This is Mullins. Obviously, this is him after the case. But once he found them, he would go knock on their door. As they came to the door, "I'm with the FBI," Mullen said, his voice steady. "We received reports that registered sex offenders in the area are being targeted. I need to ask you a few questions for your safety." Suspicious but intimidated, the men let him in. Mullen walked to the center of the room, pulled out a small camcorder. He set it on the table with his red light glowing. "For the investigation," he would tell the chomos. The 2 men sat across from him. He asked about their past, their crimes, the children they had hurt. At first, they hesitated, but Mullen played the role perfectly, calm, professional, assuring them that their cooperation was necessary. Slowly, they began to talk. The weak-ass chomos' voices trembled as they described what they had done, thinking they were talking to law enforcement. They had no idea they were sealing their fate. Mullen just listened, nodding, letting the silence stretch between their confessions. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat. Bam, bam! He shot 2 times. 2 headshots, whacked them both as the camcorder kept rolling. One left behind. A 3rd resident, also a registered sex offender, had been living in the house, but Mullen had let him leave for work before the execution began. The 3rd resident, also a chomo sex offender piece of shit, had been living in the house, but Mullen watched him as he left for work. He would ask Mullins, was it calculated? Did he want someone to find the bodies? Did he want the man to live knowing he had been spared? That he had seen the executioner and survived and look over his shoulder for the rest of his life? Well, they got the answer they were looking for. In his letter, Mullen said he checked the identities of all the 3 chomos in the house. Vasquez, Isis, and a 42-year-old James Russell. And it turns out, it wasn't just 2 he interviewed, it was the 3rd one. Chomo was just too scared to admit what happened and that he was there because of the violence, the threats, and knowing that the chomo assassinator is out there. Agent Chomo Killer is on the loose. He would later go on in the letter to talk about a convicted sex offender, Duncan. He said, "My goal is to beat Duncan to death so I can be there when he arrives." He is saying that he wants to be in prison when he gets there, beat him to death, and then meet him in hell. To get a background, Duncan is a level 3 sex offender considered to have a high risk of reoffending. He faces possible execution in Idaho for allegedly slaying 3 members of a family so that he could kidnap 2 children for sex. The body of one of those children, Dylan Groween, 9 years old, was found in a Montana campground. His 8-year-old sister, Shasta, was rescued July 2nd while she and Duncan were having breakfast. The awful details of those crimes, Mullen wrote, drove him to commit the crimes he's accused of. It made me sick to think of the abuse Dylan suffered before he died, to be discarded like garbage, Mullen wrote. Mullen, who I mentioned before, was sexually molested when he was 5 years old. He would write in a letter, "I was first befriended, manipulated, exploited, and sexually abused at the age of 5. He wrote, later he said he grew stronger and strong enough to fight back and become the hunter instead of the hunted. In prison, he said he's working on an autobiography. He's also personally writing to welcome all child sex offenders sentenced to a Washington state prison. He concluded the letter with two Latin sayings, one of the most famous from Julius Caesar: I came, I saw, I conquered. Mullen would ultimately get sentenced to 44 years, but that's not where this story ends. Now, 007, the chomo assassin, has prime hunting ground for his prey. His war was just beginning. One night, in the dim glow of the prison common area, he overheard an inmate boasting about what he had done to a child. Mullen said nothing. He simply walked back to his cell, pulled a sock from his laundry pile, stuffed a new heavy combination lock inside, and when the guards weren't watching, he swung once, twice, and again. The sickening crack of metal against the bone sent the inmate scattering. The man crumpled to the floor, twitching, choking on his own blood. The guards dragged Mullen away. He didn't resist because he didn't have any regrets. This is what he was here for. In the end, just 2 years into his sentence, Michael Anthony Mullen was found dead in prison. While his death was officially ruled a suicide, reports indicate that it was the result of a drug overdose. However, details about how he obtained the drugs or whether foul play was involved remain unclear. His death occurred just 2 years after he was sentenced to 44 years in prison for the murder of 2 registered sex offenders in Washington. The tapes were never released to the public, locked away as evidence. But for those who knew about them, one thing was certain: Mullen had made them watch. Interested to hear what you guys think. I hear some of you guys say vigilante justice is never called for when we speak on Luigi Mangione, but a lot of different opinions when it comes to children. This is a man that was brutally molested and he couldn't escape it. Every day he'd see it on the news. He'd see these people getting away with it for 5 to 7 years. Think about that. He got 44 years for blasting both of their heads open. Yet the dudes he killed didn't even do 1/3 of that for molesting multiple children. And to numb the pain, Mullins did a lot of drugs, had a major addiction, but that doesn't define him. He said at that point of his life, he didn't want to live anymore. But he said to himself, what good would it do for the kids if I'm dead? I finally become strong enough, brave enough, smart enough to do what's right. That's why people can't understand in prison how someone could throw their life away when they see these pieces of shits. The same way Michael Mullins did, because a lot of us have been around it, endured it as children, seen it happen to our family members, seen the system fail us over and over again. And then you get bigger and stronger, smarter, and you look around and you see the ones that did it to you are the weakest, scariest, softest, demonic, just cowards. And you realize that's the reason they go after the kids, is because they cannot get what they want from anybody that will fight back. They can't use their mind to manipulate people that are grown. They can't use their physicality because they're soft, they're weak, they're mentally just dumb as fuck. So they go after the weaker children, naive, easy to manipulate. And if you see everything come full circle, these 2 sex offenders thought they got off, living in some fucking sex offender village, whatever the fuck they had going on. Molesting multiple kids, didn't even do 11 years combined. But who would have thought a crime that they did in 1992 would affect a man over here who at 5 years old was tortured and molested in a very similar manner. Yet he grew up to look like this. And that day they hurt those children, it sealed their fate. He walked in the door with a Party City F.B.I costume on and a .357 Magnum, sat them down, had them confess, and blew their brains out. Well, understand that a lot of convicts have been terrorized when they were younger, and it forced them to get drug habits and just lose their mind because they never had a chance to be an innocent child. So when they see these evil, demonic motherfuckers and they're finally strong enough, they get what they feel they deserve, what the one that did it to them should have got. I understand we're all responsible for our own destiny, but fuck them. Leave our kids alone. Stay out, stay free. Us.